It might seem tiny, but when someone strides ahead on a hike, what they're signaling in part is, I don't see this as a group activity. My pace is the most important. And quite crucially, if I have any strengths that mean I'm going to leave other people behind, that's on them, not on me.
Okay, I have so much to say on this. As somebody who always walks ahead of my husband and have to constantly remind myself to wait for him, and also as somebody who used to teach people how to hike for a living, I'm going to tie these together, I swear. I'm also going to attach another video by my mutual who also stitched that, how she realized that was one of the biggest red flags for her ex-husband, is he always walked ahead of her, but in one particular night. Anyway, so when I worked at Outward Bound, this is what I did for a living. This was actually taken in Washington before I started Outward Bound, but this is what I taught. Walking in the woods with large groups of people with everything on your back. It's heavy. I also was a whitewater raft guide. That's me in the back. And unlike a lot of men, I was not strong enough to literally move my boat without my team. So I also taught people how to use teamwork to keep us alive on rivers. I was the steering wheel, they were my engine. And if they weren't paddling at the exact same time as a team, we were screwed and we were gonna run into stuff sideways and flip our boat, which is dangerous. I needed them as much as they needed me. Teamwork, right? Teamwork makes the dream work. I also wrote this article about women on the Appalachian Trail and those who wanted to hike alone, and how much it sucked every time men entered their bubble. Because a lot of women just want to hike alone because men are insufferable to hike with. Not only because they try to, sleep with us and stuff, but they're exhausting. Either because they use us as free therapists and all kinds of other stuff, or they compete with us, or they leave us behind. But men are not taught to think collectively. They are taught to think on an individual level. It's like competition over cooperation. It's the classic U.S. American hyper-capitalist, white supremacist, patriarchy, misogyny, all of that stuff, right? All of it. And women are conditioned to be codependent and constantly obsessed with what everyone else needs, especially men. So we don't even know what we need. But we end up being responsible for everyone all the time because men don't care and they don't think about anyone but themselves unless they unpack patriarchy and do the deep healing of facing their own stuff, and most of them won't do that. I was also a climber for a long time, and climbing taught me about teamwork and how you actually have to trust someone else and put your life in their hands and vice versa, and that is a very intimate thing to do. That helped me unpack a lot of my own individualism and my refusing to rely on anyone for anything. But there's a lot of climbers who are predators. They prey on younger women. I can make a whole video on that. I will. And then you got your solo climbers who are like, screw everyone. I'm just going to do this thing and be my own. I have so much to say about climbers. Let me know if you want to know my thoughts on this movie. But this right here is the most perfect example of what's wrong with men. I'm just going to do this thing that makes me feel good, and I don't really care how it impacts anyone else, because I need really to feel amazing and challenge myself all the time, even though I'll leave a mom, family, friends, now a wife, and even a kid to mourn me. But I accomplished my goal all by myself. I have so much more to say about that movie. Anyway, but what does any of this have to do with hiking? So I tell this story in the Risk podcast. It's called One of the Boys. I think the subtitle is Masculinity, where I talk about how first, I had to teach a group of 12 teenage boys between the ages of 13 to 15 how to backpack, how to hike, how to work together as a team, how to take care of themselves, but also care for each other. How taking care of yourself is what actually helps the collective, but being able to ask for help and being vulnerable and knowing that you can't do everything on your own is also important. So by the way, this Outward Bound was for troubled teens, but it wasn't like the whole prison thing, that whole industry. We did not take anyone kidnapped, no one, we didn't do any of that. And we didn't punish them. This was literally about, they were so, I was so proud of them. They were such proud. They were so proud of themselves. They actually helped save one of the kids when he threw out his back. They carried him out. I mean, it was just incredible, because this was about learning how to rely on each other, how to open up, how to cry. 2 of the boys came out on course. It was literally one of the most amazing courses I've ever been on. And one of the things we had to teach them was how to work as a team when hiking and why that's important. And they learned the hard way, right? That the person at the end is usually the slowest one. fall back, and then the whole group suffers when they don't pay attention to the person who's hiking the slowest. So we kept teaching them ways to deal with this. They would revolve who was the leader of the day. They started realizing that the kid in the back feels worse about themselves because they're being left, right? The kid in the back is already probably beating up on themselves, and then the fact that they're abandoned makes it worse. So what do they have to do? They put the strongest hiker in the back, because that teaches that hiker patience, and that person is there to support the kids who are struggling. They take the hikers who are struggling the most. We put them in the very middle, not in the front because we don't want too much pressure on them, but in the middle and spread out so that they are caring for each other, and they're also talking to each other and supporting each other instead of this individualistic mindset. So over a course of 23 days or whatever, these kids, they changed so much. And at the end of that course, they called me on my BS. Because the thing is that I realized because of these kids, and I wrote about it for Outside Magazine, what these kids were the ones that made me realize that I was worse than men. I was worse than, teenage boys, especially between the ages of 12 and 15, are so selfish. And these boys called me out on how selfish I was. Because I had been working, first of all, I'm a survivor of SA, childhood SA, and schmust, and all kinds of other stuff. And so my survival mechanism since I was a kid was to shut down, not rely on anybody, not be vulnerable, not cry. I was like, for lack of a better word, like a toxically masculine man. I experienced the world as a woman, got SA'd as a woman, and stalked and, treated like crap and talked down to and not respected, and all the things that comes with being like a woman or a femme. And I was raised to also be codependent and have to think of men all the time. But because I was so sick of it, I was so sick of especially coming from the South, I entered the outdoor world and was like, screw all this. I was also a tomboy. I wanted to get dirty. I wanted to do hard things. I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to do all this fun stuff that men just got to do without question. But I went so far on the other side that the more I went towards just doing man stuff and being around, and I was around all these really toxic men all the time, especially in the rafting industry, that I closed my heart completely. I was completely undateable. And remind me if you want to hear the whole series of how my sister basically was taught me how to stop being the dude in all my relationships. I mean, I didn't even have relationships, but she really was taught me that I have to eat meals with men. I have to spend time with them if I want to date them, because I was just so cut off. And so I really understand how men think, because I literally lived like one. And so now that I'm married, and I'm married to such a sweet man, I see all the time how those kids, I'm so glad they called me out on that Outward Bound course. They were like, Mel, we know that you care about us. Why do you pretend like you don't? You hide behind jokes. You try to act so tough. You tell us that we need to be vulnerable and we need to, whatever. And but you do the same thing. And so one of the things that I still catch myself doing, my sister called me out on this a long time ago, is speeding ahead. I have to really concentrate on not leaving my husband behind. My husband is he's way more emotionally intelligent than I am. What I mean is he grew up in a loving family. He also didn't grow up in the United States. So he wasn't taught the toxic masculinity on the level that the men that I grew up with were. Not saying it doesn't exist in France, not saying that at all, okay? But he also grew up in just such a loving family where he didn't have to build these walls, and a family that encouraged him to talk about his feelings. He's done a ton of work on himself, to get where he's at. But he teaches me so much, and yet I am the selfish one in our relationship. I'm the one who walks ahead all the time, and I'm like, oh my God, stop, Melanie. Because I am currently deconstructing this being emotionally cut off, being terrified of being vulnerable. And because I'm a survivor of so much of men's violence, I'm also so afraid of centering men that I go really far the other way. That I kind of am fork you kind of way, and I'm not thoughtful. I'm not thoughtful at all. And it's so hard for me to accept love. It's so hard for me to let myself be affectionate. It's so hard for me to talk about not now. My husband has helped me so much in terms of just not being afraid of these conversations. He's so good at it. But I swear sometimes I'm this is like him having to date a man. Actually, I even wrote about that for Glamour, because I was like, oh my God, I'm so the dude. I'm the dude in our relationship. Now, I was still raised under patriarchy, so I'm still doing the codependency thing. I'm still unpacking patriarchy. We both are. But walking ahead says a lot about their empathy.